Hello and welcome to this episode of TheSquare. I'm Poonam Schallenberger and I'm here with Sangeetha Karthik, principal in our education practice. Welcome, Sangeetha.
Thank you, Poonam. I'm very excited to be here.
I'm so glad to be chatting with you today. We're going to be talking a little bit about higher education and how some recent trends and shifts are asking us to rethink the typology so that it can continue to provide an enduring and high quality experience for students and teachers and the larger campus. Can you tell me a little bit about your work in higher education? I think there's been a sort of uptick in education projects for your practice.
That's right. We have been serving our higher education clients for many years. I've been working on higher ed projects for 10 plus years now. But yes, it has been become a renewed focus right now. We have some exciting projects that have just completed, a few of them ready to start the spring semester. So we're looking forward to them. We do have quite a few institutions here in the United States. I think there's almost 4,000 of them. Providing quality education to students all over the country, all over the globe, really. And so we've got a lot of new adventures to cover still.
Yeah, I think over the past several years, at least, higher education campuses, like many other education facilities, have been tasked with, well, how do lifestyle changes and technologies shift the way that we deliver our services and deliver a solid campus experience, whether it's virtual hybrid experiences or new education technologies, or just the way that we approach campuses differently and our expectation from them is different. But there's this sort of other movement that's happening beyond all the COVID stuff, beyond all the hybrid stuff of, well, how do we create spaces and that are resilient, that are enduring, and what are the bigger shifts that are happening for higher ed that we need to explore so that it can continue to be part of the fabric of the way that we learn? And as we think about that, part of the challenge is to, I would imagine in your position, to partner with our higher ed clients to think about, well, how do we create something that's resilient and enduring, right? Right now, so many of them are leaning on tuition and research as their primary source, a revenue source. How do you see that changing over the next several years?
So it has changed, and I think it's changed quite a bit in the last few years that everyone that's outside of that circle is noticing. But we've always felt like higher education is influenced by both ends, right? One, by the workforce, what the workforce demands. And then on the other end of the spectrum is our students that are coming out from a high school. And so you've got this higher education phase in your life that's sort of tucked in the middle. In the past, there was a lot of tension between, our clients that served our K-12 students, and then you've got your universities and community colleges on the other end. What we've noticed in the last few years is there's almost a shifting of both of these spheres, if you would, that closer and closer, creating this intersection. And so now you have students that are graduating with your associate's degree from a college before they actually graduate high school, which is a lot more relevant because not every student is tuned or wants to go to a four-year institution, and that is fine. There is also a lot of data that we are looking at that shows that I say kids, but really kids, especially high school students, are more interested in certifications and associate's degree as opposed to a traditional four-year education.
Yeah, you bring up an interesting point. It's so many headlines about student loan debt, the cost of tuition.
Right.
And so it's asking people to really think about, well, what is the value that higher ed brings to my life? Because it is not always a small investment for folks. Or sometimes it's the first time that they're going to college in their family. And so that leap can sometimes feel overwhelming. So if you're coming out with some of those skill sets already, there's a sort of pressure for higher ed to really deliver in ways that they haven't before, right?
Right. And so I think one of the points you just made is very important because you don't want to saddle somebody with more commitment and more debt at the end of the process, right? This whole notion of higher education elevating your quality of life is kind of squashed by that, when you graduate and you've got a ton of student loan that you're saddled with for many years. So this idea of micro-certification, associate degrees where you can graduate and make not just a living wage, but an excellent salary because you've got that skill set, whether it's a particular type of skill or it's some sort of a workforce training is hugely important. And which is why like we talked about before, the intersectionality between our K-12 institutions and our community colleges. What I find more interesting is also this other shift where community colleges are partnering with universities, where you almost have a laddered approach where you help the student get an associate's degree, and if they want to move on, then they can go get their baccalaureate degree either from the same community college or they are in turn partnered with another university. So there's that easy shift. I will tell you that for somebody on the client side, right, helping them really shape a student experience, it's quite different when you look at it from a student's perspective. Because it's interesting, a college experience for a typical American student is almost like pretend life where you learn to become an adult, right? Like you live on your own, you learn to prioritize, you learn to hopefully manage money and your time.
Do your own laundry.
Yes, that.
Yeah.
And make a few meals and, survive the few meals. But I think as there's shifts in the demographics of our typical college student, whether it's the global economy, recent events in the last few years, the intervention of technology, this idea of having a career and going to college at the same time, all of these have completely transformed the experience. And so today's student is vastly different from a typical college student. And college campuses and universities and our clients are trying to cater to all of these. I was reading a survey that said 18 to 24-year-olds, right, are typical college demographics. Now, we could talk a little bit about what is a typical college student, but the 18 to 24-year-old have reported high levels of mental health struggles, high levels of stress, worried about their future. Yet, in the same vein, they are the subsect group that says they are very optimistic about the future. So I'm going to just kind of pause there and let you kind of work through some.
We'll try to make sense. We'll try to unpack that a little, right? But I like the idea of this typical American college student. And you're right. Like even what we used to see on television growing up for me in the 90s and early 2000s, it was you'd go away to college, you would learn how to kind of grow up as a young adult, and you would sort of focus on this particular major or whatever and maybe get an internship. But your life was really kind of in this particular campus or dorm building or whatever. And just even over the past decade, we've seen sort of that, maybe you can call it academic sprawl, if you will, not in geography, but just in the kinds of ways that we're engaging with the campus and who is engaging with the campus.
Right.
You mentioned that there's the sort of natural succession from high school to higher ed, but then there's also workplace trends that are shaping this, right? So it's much easier to kind of enter the workforce when you've graduated from high school and you've got I love the idea of a micro-certification. But then there's also this pressure in the workplace to maintain these skill sets that are changing even faster. It feels like the shelf life of them are half as long as they used to be. So a lot of folks maybe even coming back to the higher ed experience when maybe we thought we were done with it.
Yes, absolutely true. And then then you've created this additional market for professional learning, professional development. And I think you're absolutely right. I think there's only a shelf life of 2 years for those of you that are paying for college or just paid for your college. Just know that I think it's a shelf life of 2 years before you have to upskill, reskill, retool what you already learned. Because you are looking at majors like AI, where they don't even have a set curriculum right now because they can't, because it's such an evolving field. And then so there are aspects of technology and just the the development in the global economy that changes how we all do our jobs every day, which means that universities and colleges need to say, okay, I'm going to capture that market share because here we have another group that we could easily cater to that is far more sustainable, right? Because we went from buying something one time to having a sustained, use of it, whether it's your Amazon or your Netflix that you pay for every month, right?
Yeah.
And so subscriptions have become a huge deal, and so I think education is not finally catching on. It's always caught on. I think we are trying to capture another market share right now.
Right. It's interesting because I get the alumni catalogs from and it's just, but you feel sometimes, not always, you can feel very removed from that experience. It was something that college is something I went to X number of years ago. We won't disclose, right? And X number of years ago. But I think campuses have always tried to keep us engaged and connected, whether it's our reunions or sending us the magazines with the announcements. But now there's this workplace pressure even that is opening up the possibility, like you said, of reintroducing us back to learning. So there's this opportunity for higher ed to capture an audience that has an appetite to go back to school or to upskill, reskill, like you mentioned. And I don't think that means that the traditional demographic is necessarily going away.
Right.
And that's not what I'm hearing. I think research and tuition will continue to be a major piece of that revenue and pie. But how do they start to cater to the needs of folks who've maybe left the college campus formally 5 years ago, 10, 20 years ago? How do they meet the needs of that group?
I think several opportunities. This whole notion of hybrid learning, the flexibility, and really looking at the experience of all of those different groups, other than our 18 to 24-year-old, your typical demographic plays into it. And what's interesting is buildings and facilities have a direct relationship to some of those functionalities, right? Because you have to have all of the utilities and the spaces in place. Like if you want the college campus to operate long after 5 p.m. so you can capture this market share that is doing something else during the day, whether it's another job because they have a career or because that's the only way they can sustain their life, then you do need to shape the environment to cater to that. And so we had talked a lot about this whole notion of satellite campuses where you don't have to go to your typical, campus to go take that one class at 6 p.m. 2 or 3 days a week, whatever the schedule may be. This idea of establishing satellite campuses for really in those locations where you could cater to those folks that may access that amenity becomes an important part. We did a couple of projects where we did provide certification and nursing skills certification in an office building that was a lease space that was away from the campus. Well, it was a twofold reason. One was because they didn't have the facilities, the top-notch facilities they needed for the certification, nor did they have the space. And so in lieu of creating a project that would have to wait a few years before you broke ground and actually have a ground-up building, they actually leased a space very in close proximity to the hospital and created this program. But an important part of that program was also built into the mechanics of it, that feeds into the, if you will, the economy of it, was this idea of professional development and certification, because much like a lot of our professional certifications, there is a certain level of training and classes that everyone needs to take to keep up their registration and their licensure. And so when we did this, we sort of were looking at it through the lens of this particular client. But interestingly, after we started to look at some baselines, this is not this is not a one-off. This is happening in multiple locations because you almost bring the college to where your students are, potential students are, in lieu of having your student that may not be driving to your campus for that particular program. And we talked to the client after this facility opened, and it was like a 300 or 400% like application for this particular program, because there was a lot of tension, a lot of discussion on, can we really bring the campus to this like, small micro campus, and so the graphics and the branding and really the flavor along with the environment alluded back to the, because these students, the nursing students, move in cohorts, right? And so they wanted to make sure that they know that they are in this particular lease space that's still part of the bigger, larger campus. Well, they didn't have to worry too much because I think there was like a 300 or 400% upshoot in application for like 40 seats. And so they've completed it, and there's already discussions of it expanding either in the same location or in another location.
Yeah, because we kind of joked about the fact that we learn how to do our laundry or learn how to become young adults and professionals in our first traditional go at college, the 18 to 24-year-old demographic. But it's for a long time, for decades, schools and higher ed campuses have considered that is a major part of our development and have designed spaces and campuses and programs that support students in that stage of their life. But now what I'm hearing is that you have to kind of consider, well, where are the other students at? And they don't always have the time to drive into the traditional campus or even navigate that bigger campus, but to give something that's conveniently located for them. What other sort of considerations? Is there childcare sort of considerations, co-working opportunities? How else do you support them?
So yes to all of those. But I think I just want to kind of dial back just a little bit and still talk about our student that is just graduated from high school, right? An important piece of this student experience becomes that support that they need to navigate through their campus. And so a lot of our clients are looking at what does it take for a student that has never navigated the system, metaphorically and then physically at campus, how do they actually get to what services they need. And I was talking to another client of ours, and they were explaining they had data points that said a student sometimes, especially if you're a first-time college goer, pulls up to the campus 5 or 6 times before they actually step foot, because it's really scary to navigate this. And so how do you ease into that experience and provide all of the support and services somebody needs if you're unfamiliar with that environment? And so that plays a lot into it. We've got a lot of smaller projects that we are working on that really look at the mental health services that are being provided. And so I think that is really a good change, that we are acknowledging that it is all part of this experience, and knowing that the stressors and some of the challenges our students face, those services need to be present and available. Because again, going back to this demographic, they're very aware of what they are up against. And so being able to navigate that becomes an important piece of it. Mm-hmm. Now, going back to the other end of the spectrum, I think, childcare services and some of those other functionalities were usually focused on the educators, right? Like the professors and the staff. But I think if you want to reach and really connect with a student that has so many other challenges that are in their way before they could get that degree or get that certification, you do need to meet them where they can or meet you. And so this idea of hybrid and environments, but also going back to the hybrid and really reaching our students. One of the other challenges I think a lot of our clients are facing is the fact that after COVID, a lot of people, I'm talking about the educators, the professors, and all of those folks that provide the education, don't want to be on campus, right?
Yeah.
And so how do you support the student that is paying, gobs of money to get this education, and then the people who support them don't want to drive into the campus?
You have to deliver that quality of education.
Absolutely.
And so when we're talking about that sustainability of how do you continue to support the business of higher education through some of these larger changes? One is helping, it sounds like, them understand that their student base isn't always just going to be this traditional 18 to 24-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
They might continue to be a large piece of that, but there's an appetite for higher education that exists outside of that, whether it's people who have recently graduated or graduated a while ago. And so meeting their needs, convenient location, giving them the amenities and the support system that they want. But then you bring up a really good point. We also, and it's not unique to healthcare or to higher education, but it is unique in some ways, is that talent retention and recruitment is just as much of a pain point as it seems to be elsewhere. Can you talk to me a little bit about some of the challenges that higher ed is facing in recruiting and retaining talent, maybe even especially because of the whole flexibility hybrid situation?
Yeah, and so that's been an interesting shift, but we sort of saw it coming because they are a workforce, and some of the points that were outlined in the hybrid report that we put out kind of completely mirrors the challenges that our institutions are facing. So you have this group of people that you want to retain, right? Attract, because they spend a lot of money getting them to become part of this institution, but you want to keep
right.
them.
And it builds your institutional brand too, right?
And your reputation.
Right.
And so there's a lot at stake. And so how do you provide the flexibility that they want, that they demand, and balance it with the student support and the experience that we just talked about a minute ago? Now you overlay that with all of these buildings on campus that are virtually empty because you don't have staff members there, that they just sort of pop in, teach a class or two, and then pop out. Now, if you're a graduate, professor and you have some grad students, you have the flexibility. You have a group of students that are, in my mind, equipped to sort of handle that scenario. But if you're an 18-year-old, a first-time, college student, or you don't even have to be in that age demographic, you're just a first-time student, I think you need the support and then that physical presence. This whole notion of I could just tap somebody on their shoulder or flag them down the hall becomes really important. And so much like our workplaces, our universities have really thought about recharacterizing the staff and the faculty spaces into really these attractive spaces for building community, whether within the department or the larger campus community. Because again, the community aspect of it is such a huge part of the student experience.
Yeah, Sangeetha, we have done, about this. We've done a couple of studies on design lessons from teachers.
Right.
And while they were focused on K through 12, what I think at the end of the day it underscored for us was that we so often think of schools, higher ed campuses included, as places of learning for students. Mm-hmm. But that quality of learning is so much influenced by the quality of the staff.
Yeah.
And by how well that staff feel, how good they feel in that environment, how well supported they feel. And so there's that notion, and we learned a lot of lessons from those two explorations. But then also this idea that professors are workforce. They, we often think about teachers as being this special thing. You run into them in the grocery store, and you forget that they're real people with real expectations and are not exclusive of some of the trends that you're seeing in the traditional workplace. Can you talk to me about how you might be able to translate some of those corporate trends into the higher ed campus as well?
Yeah, I think this idea that colleges and universities are actually a workplace for a huge subsect of people, right? An important subsect of people, is another way to actually look at this environment, if you will. And so some of the things that we're doing is really creating this sense that you're actually on campus for a particular day or a certain amount of time, and it's all about collaboration, community, and establishing that connection, whether within your department, within your peers, or with your students. And so we are shaping those spaces, which is another interesting piece because higher ed institutions love their office spaces, and there's a lot of research grants and a lot of other tangible elements that are tied to a physical office. And so if you're only coming there for a few hours, then it's all about establishing that community, right? So maybe we don't need that many offices. Now, we've got some clients that are more inclined to that idea than others. Now, having said that, I think our facilities folks from the institutions have become very astute because what they've started doing is really tracking to see, how often a particular office is occupied. And, there is a ROI on it, and say if this particular office is only occupied for so many hours a week, and then almost all of it is dedicated to having one-on-one time with the students, then why can't we have all of those as shared spaces as opposed to owned spaces? And then our own spaces almost become like our studio where you're sitting shoulder to shoulder. Now, while that's not hugely groundbreaking for folks like us that are, in the creative fields, it's a hard pill to swallow,
right,
from a higher ed institution.
Right. And, I'm sure maybe for newer staff joining, it's probably a little bit easier, but for folks who have been there or are tenured there, it might be a more difficult change to navigate. I had a similar conversation with someone in healthcare, and a lot of physicians are also very used to their own office space. Newer physicians are more inclined to kind of want and even gravitate towards the spaces that are more collaborative and open because they can kind of run ideas past their colleagues. But other physicians really want their own space. And I would imagine kind of professors or faculty, there's that sort of dichotomy there as well. How do you balance that? Because it came up in the hybrid report as well, that it's really this idea of balance. How do you provide a mix of spaces?
I think it's going to vary with every department, right? And it's going to definitely vary with every institution. And as always, we found it much more successful when it's propelled by the client, because we could show the data, but everybody knows that every entity has its own culture and how they operate. And so we are far more successful when it's propelled. We have all of the tools and we have all of the people to bring it to reality. But they're getting pretty savvy because there are dollars, like tangible money resources tied to these places that are being heated and cooled and lit and not used at all. So this whole idea of how much is owned versus how much is shared comes into play. Now, providing all of the amenities that our workforce in a university setting need becomes an important part as well. So the aesthetics, the amenities, the accommodations that you provide all come into play. So one of the things we've started doing is we do have a lot of folks that teach a virtual class, right? So in lieu of like shutting your door in an office and meddling with your camera, we've started providing almost like, these small recording studios, like where you plug and play, like the whole place is equipped. So if you're a faculty or, that likes to move around and teach, you've got all of the bells and whistles, if you will. So you can come plug in your computer and everything is set up, and it's a really easy experience for you, while it is a pretty professional lecture for the students. So it's a kind of a win-win situation. So you're not standing there fiddling around with the technology. Everything is equipped. You come plug and play. So it should be virtually identical to a studio experience. And so providing some of those have been very successful for us. And then also the this idea of, I mean, every university and college campus is a global play field, right? Because you're there collaborating with partners across the world. So providing a lot of these affordances, not in a typical classroom, but in a setting which is almost equipped like a small conference room, but you're able to interact with somebody that's across the globe doing the same research that your students are doing. Has really changed the experience. So now you're more likely to drive to the campus because instead of trying to, draw the blinds in your home office and try to record, a so-so recording, you can create a repository of your lectures that you can tap back to for a few years, hopefully.
Yeah, in that hybrid report, and I know the hybrid report came out of a different practice, but has total application across all of these different sectors. And in the hybrid report, we asked hybrid workers what their top amenities that they wanted, and it was technology.
Yeah.
It's because, like you said, it's a tool. The place is a tool.
Mm-hmm.
And so making their work easier and maybe even more fun, it becomes a more attractive place to be because it's so much easier, like you said, to plug in and end up with a better quality product. It removes some of those friction points that you might have in a remote setting. But the other thing I think it does is it creates predictability.
Yes.
Right? We can bank on a certain set of equipment and facilities and affordances that maybe have there's so many other variables if you're going to work from a coffee shop or even another co-working space or work from home. And it first serves as a tool to attract faculty, staff back to the campus. I say office or campus. But then you have the opportunity to make it even more delightful. What are some of the other ways? You mentioned aesthetics. I think that's an interesting one because it came up in the hybrid report too.
Yes, it did.
So how are you shaping the experience for faculty and staff, professors and beyond, right? Because we need to staff these places. How else are you doing that?
Well, by really caring about creating a sense of place is what I would say. And I think it is, to me, it's sort of a given for the students as well as for everybody that teaches over there. One of the things that we are seeing now is, we'd always harped about creating the sense of place around our building and, really reinforcing the campus environment, understanding that this new building that we are creating, whether it's from scratch or through renovation, is part of a larger network, if you will, right? And so this notion of including art within our outdoor spaces, really thinking and designing the exterior. I think as architects, we've always wanted to focus on it, but I think when you talk about resource allocation, and I'm not talking about a large campus building, right? Because that has a lot more implications and a lot more resources than a small intervention in a campus network. And so really saying what is the impact area of your particular project, even if you are just renovating a few spaces, and seeing how that impact could almost have a larger effect than just one or two places you touch is vital. But one of the things you want when you walk through a campus, and the first thing you see are the physical buildings and the physical spaces. So if the landscape and if it looks like there is a sense of community, not just inside the building, but outside, it really does appeal to the students. And I always say that students these days are very smart. I mean, they're the Pinterest generation, right? They know what is out there, both good and bad. And so that goes to your campuses as well. They're like, oh, this doesn't look very nice. This doesn't look like a place you want to be. But then it also conversely translates into the adult experience, the instructor educator's experience as well.
We often say that part of the reason, and I know that campuses are not necessarily offices, but part of the benefit that you get from coming back to places, whether you're a student or a professor or you work in HR on campus, is you get to be around the people. It's that collaboration and community that I think everybody, whether you're a student or wherever you fall in the college campus community, you want the connection to people. There's a lot of opportunity for cross-departmental learning. But then when you also recognize that, like you mentioned before, there's only a finite number of resources, right? You do have to power these places and provide water and all of those things that you mentioned. I think there's also, when we talk about the sustainability of higher ed businesses and campuses and how they continue to meet these evolving needs, there's also a huge challenge to say, how do we do more with less? How do we get these people to interact with each other in casual and intentional ways so some of this learning happens from collaboration and community? How have you seen sort of that interdepartmental emphasis either change over or how have you seen it change over the past several years?
So I think one of the main reasons, as you pointed out, is a resource allocation issue, right? So that becomes when you have these multidisciplinary buildings that we've designed both in smaller campuses as well as part of a larger, because that intersectionality again comes into the workforce, right? Like we all don't do just one thing. I sit as part of the industry advisory board for one of our clients, and they talk about the top skills, right? It's the same that we've all been discussing here at the office, like at every workforce or workplace discussion: communication, collaboration, problem solving, and critical thinking. And so I'm like flipping through this brochure and I'm like, these things are so sort of, they're nothing tangible, but that these are skills that everyone needs for the workforce and for life, really.
Yeah.
And so how could you, so the multifunctional, multidisciplinary buildings where these meetings are serendipitous have become a lot more relevant right now, not only because of the resources, but because of what the industry needs and then the skills that the students need to be trained at. Now, the other part of the sustainability piece is really, one is today's student is very well aware of all of the challenges that the world is facing in terms of the real sustainability and the climate issues, and are very tuned to it. And it doesn't matter if the generation prior to them doesn't care. They care because they've got many years ahead of some of the rest of the population. And so back to this, if you have almost 4,000 institutions, how does one college or university bubble up to the top, right? And so the notion of really designing buildings that are not only relevant for the curriculum and the students, but also for today's, just being environmentally conscious and sustainable becomes an important piece, because guess what? When they are going through a brochure, that is one of the things that they are looking for, because that's the real reason. I think there's, again, more studies that say that's why today's student doesn't want to drive that much, because, when you're 16 and you want to get your license the day you turn 15 and a half, 16, whatever the case may be, is not true anymore. Yeah. And while we could, shrug and say, oh, they're the Uber generation, I think part of it is also because there is an environmental conscious human there that understands the implications for many years, because they have to be dealing with all of the challenges as we are all dealing with it right now.
Earlier you mentioned how there's this real demand for the future workforce to develop those skills in communication, collaboration, problem solving, all those soft skills. And it's interesting. I've been talking to a lot of friends, family of mine, and they're maybe physicians or in the medical space, but they're learning that they didn't necessarily get taught some of those business skills that they're finding they need maybe more. You need to know how to do more than a specific medical procedure. You need to learn how to navigate the finances of a practice or whatever. And so I think that even from when we first started this conversation about the pressures that are on higher ed, coming from the expectations of someone who's just newly minted, just graduated from high school, but then also the workforce pressures. There is this expectation that we are not only able to keep up with the skills, the hard skills, and maybe return back for another certification, but that we're also continuing to evolve in our soft skills, because how we learn and how we collaborate is also always changing. How can you maybe design a campus that helps to facilitate some of that interdepartmental collaboration and learning, where maybe you're going to school for nursing, but you need to learn how to do some of the business components that come with it?
That's a really good question, and I think the biggest shift that I've personally seen is that acknowledging it as part of as a design professional, acknowledging it and really addressing it as part of our design process, and that being again propelled by the client. I think we have always been. Again, we are creatives and we do have vested interest in the product that we create, right? Because it is our brand and we have a far more altruistic notion, right? When you when we design our buildings. But I think it's really interesting because now those are the discussions that stand shoulder to shoulder with the number of labs that you are providing in a building, or what type of amenities and equipment we are accommodating in the building. And so that's really refreshing because it's not an afterthought anymore. It does drive a lot of our design decisions from the start. And so how important something is depends on how much time you give it, right? Mm-hmm. And so this idea that we are discussing these things, creating spaces and really shaping experiences both inside and outside a building, and really thinking through how that could impact a college campus at a campus level is really refreshing. And I think we've got a long ways to go, but it's a start, right? And then this whole idea of industry partnerships and being able to bring some of the relevance, because then you talk about the pipeline issues as well, right? Because that's another piece that we haven't touched on as yet. But the idea that when industry partners come into play, they're like, look, your students have all the certifications, that's great, but they can't, do X, Y, and Z. And then how do we make sure that when we go through a design exercise, a physical campus intervention, how can we contribute to it? Now, we are all very tuned to the fact that alone can't change it, but that's just one of the many steps that they have to take.
Right. I also remember you and I have had conversations, not in higher ed, but in K through 12, maker spaces, mm-hmm. tinker labs, all of these fun words for spaces that are really boiled down to having the right kind of equipment and resources, but remaining flexible enough to accommodate all different kinds of students, different ages, different uses. Maybe there's a biology lab that happens there, but then maybe a STEM thing comes in later. College campuses traditionally have been, oh, are you a biology major? All of your classes and labs are clear across town over mm-hmm. there. If you're a physics major, it's someplace else. English, oh, that's in a different city. Like, we don't even know who you are. So how have you found campuses being more creative about, like you mentioned, being more thoughtful, saying, hey, we might be making 2 labs or putting in this many spaces, but how do we expand the use of this beyond just this particular curriculum?
I think the industry partnerships have come into play. I think there is some parameters at a higher education level, right? When you are designing for a particular department, it's a lot more focused than another educational space in a K-12 environment. So we are tuned to that as well. We understand that, they do have to serve this many students. There are certain contact hours and, full-time students that they need to sort of move through the system. And then the spaces are just one of the many pieces in that big equation. Having said that, I think what we are seeing now is this idea of connectivity, both physical, tangible, but also the intangible ones. How is a building like opening up to its neighbors around it and saying, hey, you can come and you can do this. We were working on a particular project where it's mostly physics and chemistry students, but then they wanted to create this industry partner space on the lower level with both physical and visual connectivity to the street, to the adjacent buildings, along with utilities that could be provided for other students, somebody from the biology department, somebody from the math department to come and collaborate. English.
Even. They'll let us in.
They will let you in. But some of it is also, those are the design cues, right? Like, how do you environments make you feel a certain way, whether you know that or not. Like, I always say that when you're in a place of worship, whatever that may mean to you, you bring your best self to that place. And so this whole idea of wide open spaces, large ceilings, well lit, and first floor entrances where the door is open and it's not behind multiple layers, while taking into consideration the safety and security in a campus environment, of course. But it's all these physical cues that says you're welcome and everyone else is well.
Right. Like you mentioned, you can't just slap together two departments and say, great, collaboration, done and done, right? Because there are certain considerations, and labs and things are way more sophisticated at a higher ed campus than it is on a K through 12 one. But there are opportunities. I know that we've designed some facilities where there's these almost lounge spaces that punctuate an anchor staircase, because then you can kind of hang out together. I was talking to an accountant the other day, and he mentioned to me how so much of his work actually has nothing to do with numbers. It's a lot of reading. And but so this idea of being able to bring people from different sorts of practices and backgrounds together to learn from each other, you can't just slap it together, but there is opportunity to kind of say, how do we casually bring them together? These serendipitous sort of interactions.
Yeah, food, right? Like, so we pay a lot of attention to food and coffee because those are the ones that power a college campus. And so, when in doubt, make sure there's a coffee shop and make sure it's operational when the building opens. And I say it in jest, but it's really true if you can think back to your college days and why do you see a lot of folks working in a busy coffee shop? Because there is that idea of community that is just established just because there's caffeine and then there's Wi-Fi. And so those two things do actually make a difference. And then going back to some of the pressures of academics, being able to access and have all of these amenities late at night, not having to navigate through like 4 different buildings to get to sustenance when you can, or when you need rather, becomes an important factoid in how buildings are designed and how campuses are stitched together.
It's such a long way from. So I went to a college campus where, depending on the classes you had, like the actual class, not even just your major, determined where you lived. And so we all lived together. And there's value to that, right? There's value to not totally disintegrating the department structure. You've talked about that some here, that collaboration that happens when you're with like-minded colleagues. But now, even we've been going back to this idea of the pressures that are on the higher ed campus. And it's not just from the students that are coming in, not that typical American student only, but also what does a workplace or someone who's returning back to the college campus want? And when I think about myself, maybe returning back for recertification or upskilling, it's hard for me to think of myself as a student.
That's right.
It's more likely that I would think of myself as this is part of my professional development. And so there's a networking opportunity that I'm looking for, someone who maybe has a background in something else that I can learn from. So recognizing that there's a need for both still.
Right. Well, and then I think this whole idea of creating a campus within a campus, right? Creating a community within a community, but also making sure that the outside can come in and create another larger community, because back to what you mentioned, that becomes a very important piece. That networking is almost sort of, you learn to do it at a campus level, and as you progress in your career, whatever the career may be, is an important aspect. To me, it's just like problem solving or communication, because that is a skill that you need to have. So we are looking at spaces that are really focused around the campus community, but also making sure that you can have a forum to actually expose to the larger, whatever, the city, the state, all of the wonderful things that your students are doing. So this idea of having, community spaces for large gatherings, hosting events, having all of those amenities that could be used by, quote unquote, the public, really like opens doors for the entire campus, inviting the folks into it. And so we see a lot of that more, we used to see it a lot in community colleges, right? Like in a smaller, but we're seeing it more and more in institutions as well.
Yeah, it's interesting that, there's such a conversation or related to this that about like, well, will we come back to the office? Do we need to come back to the office? But the office has this sort of enduring space in the way that we work and engage with each other. But the office is a tool to do that. And similarly, the college campus is a tool. And despite all these headlines that say, gosh, do I need a college degree? Or college is so expensive now. It's really recognizing that the campus has always had to evolve, and it continues to be a tool for us as a pipeline of talent for the future, but also to continue to empower and equip the current workforce for the jobs that we don't even know will exist.
That's
right? I think it's a really exciting space to be. What is it that you're most excited about for the future of the higher ed campus?
Well, I'm most excited about all of the new things yet to come, right? Because we feel like every time we do something different in a campus, I feel like, oh my gosh, like this is so awesome, and this is going to really change a student's experience. But now that we as designers are much more empathetic to everyone that walks through those doors, walks through that campus. I feel like as a design community, we've become we were always empathetic, but we've actually acknowledged it now, and we are making sure that the experience of every student that comes through that campus is great, and it's the best that they can be. So I'm really excited about the future because there's a lot more to come, and so we do have a lot of exciting things going on, and there's several more in the pipeline.
Yeah, lots of pressure. I'm so glad that we've come away from the conversation of how will COVID impact all of this, right? But recognizing that there still are and will always continue to be pressure on places like higher ed campuses to change, but lots of challenges, but also lots of opportunity.
Absolutely.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Sangeetha. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
It was great, as always. Thank you, Poonam.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for watching. We'll see you the next time on The Square.